The Bitcoin Lightning Network continues its meteoric growth, and in today's video we are going to be taking a look at how to manage your Lightning node using Thunderhub. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, Bitcoin pleb, and all-around raging capitalist. And I'm excited to do this video today, which really builds on some of the past videos that I've done, which overview the Lightning Network itself, as well as what are some of the key high-level considerations when thinking about running your own Bitcoin Lightning node. And so I'm going to link both of those videos in the description down below and here on the screen. If you haven't yet seen those and are newer to Lightning and running your own node, I would encourage you to check those out first. So pause this video, check those videos out, and then come back. But yes, in today's video, we're going to be going into detail into Thunderhub, which is one of the great pieces of software that allows you to really interface with and manage your Lightning node when it comes to managing your channels, liquidity, and all that good stuff. So you're not going to want to miss a thing. For those returning to the channel, welcome back, my friends. As always, it is a pleasure to have you. And for those new to the channel, I welcome you as well. I know there are many of you watching who are not currently subscribed. And so if you like this content, I invite you to consider subscribing and join us in our merry gang in cyberspace. I cover all manner of Bitcoin-related content, including a whole slew of tutorials like this, running your own node, wallets, news, analysis. You want it, I cover it. But with all that out of the way, I want to do just a very brief refresher of key concepts before we jump into the meat for today. All right, so again, in this overview section, I'm just going to kind of go through a refresher, but for the full download of some of the concepts I'm discussing, be sure to check out those videos that I mentioned just a moment ago. But as a recap, the Lightning Network is a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin, comprised of thousands and thousands of different, essentially 2 of 2 multi-sig wallets that construct these payment channels. And so a payment channel is simply a channel that allows 2 individuals, 2 entities, to transact as many times as possible. Think of an abacus bead, sort of, moving the bead back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The network topography works by being able to route payments through these different channels. So if I want to send, sats to Bob, but I don't have a direct connection with Bob, but I do have a connection with Katie, who has a connection to Bob, that payment can be routed accordingly. But it's not that simple. As a reminder, there's what are called a local balance and a remote balance. Or said another way, outbound liquidity. These are sats you can spend out. And then there is inbound liquidity, or sats that can be spent into you. As I cover in the other video, one of the big things you want to think about is like, what is your use case in wanting to run a Lightning node? Obviously, running a node in general is the most secure private way to engage with Bitcoin, whether that's talking about on-chain or off-chain in the case of Lightning. But beyond that, right, is this primarily for, you personally spending? Maybe you're a business of some kind, or you want to accept payments in Bitcoin. I recently did a video on BTC Pay Server that you've got to check out if you are a business, or you consult, you have a side gig, you want to accept Bitcoin. That is an absolutely great tool, and you can accept payments through Lightning with that, but you need to run your own Lightning node. So that could be another use case. Yet another use case, as I've discussed in past videos, is you want to run a routing node. So you want to basically help route payments on the Lightning network, and you can charge a fee for that service. Now, this is not necessarily going to be a huge, money maker, particularly if you're just getting started. But if we think long term and think about how the Lightning Network is going to grow and grow and grow, as more and more individuals start, using it, it could get very interesting, in the future. So decide on your use case, and also decide on a reasonable amount of sats that you want to start using. And that should be very much based on the use case, based on either your spending habits or based on how much you expect others to be sending you in the case that you're a business, or depending on how, big you want to get in terms of a routing node, you want to think of right sizing the amount of Bitcoin that you will use to open channels with other peers on the network. And one of the key challenges of running a Lightning node is managing liquidity. So depending on that use case, ensuring that you're balancing your payment channels. If you've got only remote balance and therefore you only have inbound liquidity, you can't send anything out. And the reverse is true if you only have local balance, i.e. outbound liquidity. You can only send in and you can't take anything, or you can only send out and can't take anything in. And so the tool we're going to be looking at today, called Thunderhub, is one of a couple really effective pieces of software that allow you to do rebalancing across channels, that allow you to open channels with others, to add peers, from the network, to close channels if you wish, to maybe take some of your liquidity off of Lightning back onto main chain Bitcoin. So really your kind of cockpit to engage with the Lightning network. I would just mention very briefly that Thunderhub is what we're going to be going through today. And specifically, I'm going to be going through my Umbrel node. There are many different node implementations. My node, Raspberry Blitz are two other great ones. But in terms of software of helping you interface with that node, there's Thunderhub. There's also Ride the Lightning. These are probably the two best sort of all-encompassing pieces of software that really let you do kind of everything. And importantly, Thunderhub is for LND nodes. So there's a couple different flavors of Lightning implementations, including LND, which is from Lightning Labs, but there's also C Lightning and Eclair. Ride the Lightning supports all three of those. Thunderhub supports just LND, and I will very likely do a video in the future on Ride the Lightning. But those are kind of your two big choices, I think, for managing your node if you're really serious about this. There is also Lightning Terminal, which is a product from Lightning Labs, and that has a number of really cool modules that allow you to do things like acquire inbound capacity from their pool marketplace, or cycle and do some rebalancing. But that's quite focused in terms of the use cases, and it's not, for example, it doesn't allow you to kind of open your channels themselves and manage the channels accordingly. So with that ingredient list, right, you need to choose the node, you need to think about your use case and therefore the amount of Bitcoin you want to kind of commit to this. If you are interested in running an Umbrel node, which again has support for both on-chain Bitcoin as well as the Lightning Network, I've done a whole video on how to assemble your node from scratch and flash the Umbrel operating system onto it. So again, check out those prior videos for more. But now with all of that out of the way, let's jump into the actual tutorial. All right, so we are in my Umbrel dashboard. Again, I'll also link in the description down below thunderhub.io, where you can go to their GitHub. And you can also find some different integrations for Raspberry Blitz or MyNode. So some very helpful documentation here. But again, I'll be taking you through step-by-step today with Umbrel. And so I'll come over to the App Store and we will find Thunderhub. So let's click into Thunderhub and we'll go ahead and install. All right, and we will go ahead and open. So we've got our Thunderhub. It's recognizing obviously our Umbrel account. I suppose you could have multiple of those. So we'll go ahead and log in. And we will use the default password, which Umbrel indicated, which is money printer go burr. All right, so we are on the home tab of Thunderhub. And just to orient you to this first page, you've got your on-chain and Lightning balances here at the top left. So right now I've got about 1.5 million sats in on-chain balance. So haven't yet opened any channels. That is why the Lightning balance is blank. We're going to look at that in just a moment. And it's kind of nice. You can send and receive directly from this interface. Obviously you have that with Umbrel, but depending on what what node you're running, this might be a useful little section. I've got my public key here, so in case I need to share this with someone else who wants to open a channel with me, that is what I would need to share. I've got the onion route as well as some additional details. And as we will look at, this is important if you're going to use a service to acquire inbound liquidity. And then you'll have all sorts of little reports, transactions, liquidity report, if you're running this as a routing node, how often is it forwarding, and so on and so forth. So none of that obviously is populated since we have not done anything yet. I'm going to explain each of these tabs quickly on the left, and then we're going to go into the relevant ones based on what we want to accomplish today, which is really to open some channels, acquire some inbound liquidity, rebalance those channels, and that's probably going to be what we focus on for today. The dashboard is you can basically add different widgets if you want kind of a customized different set of information that you're presented with. So you can always do that. Peers is where we're going to go to establish connections with other peers on the network. And I'll show you a few tools on how you can identify good other peers to connect to. Channels is where we will be able to see the status of our channels. What's the channel state? How much do we have in our kind of outbound capacity, inbound capacity, local and remote balance, etc. Rebalance we will show as well later on. This is a really nice tool that allows you to kind of rebalance liquidity across your channels depending on what you want to achieve. Details gives you details on your different channels. Transactions, self-explanatory. Forwards gives you how many payment forwards your node is conducting, or how much it's sort of routing. Chain gives you on-chain, any details of your on-chain transactions. Tools is very important as well. This is where some of the backup information lives, right? So you can see, you download your channel backups, verify your channel backups. This is definitely important, although if you are doing this in Umbrel, I would highly, highly recommend as part of your backups, you not only maintain a good kind of cadence of backing up your channels using this, but also from Umbrel, if you come all the way back to Lightning, your sort of Lightning tab, you'll see these dots. And you can download your channel backup file from there. I would recommend doing both. I've seen certain cases where users want to kind of recover their channel states, and if you're doing Umbrel, I've just seen cases where it's easier done with this backup file that you get from this this option here. So just keep that in mind when you're doing backups. Super important, because as we alluded to earlier, right, this is not like on-chain Bitcoin where you've got your recovery phrase and that's really all you need. With every kind of transaction that's happening with your Lightning node, it is recording that to its database, to its sort of channel states. And so that is a much more kind of dynamic, fluid state to capture than it is for on-chain. Okay, so let's pop back over. Swap is nice. This is using a tool from Bolts, which allows you to take Bitcoin from Lightning and move it on-chain through what is called a submarine swap. So this is basically just a service powered by Bolts that's kind of embedded in here, which is nice. Stats are the statistics for your node. And then scores can be a very helpful, this is the boss scoring. So they basically rank different nodes out there. So for example, this can be a really good tool to identify the types of peers that you may want to connect to. So I can see this one here. This is, I guess, presumably Bitfinex. You see Wallet of Satoshi. You see a lot of different ones up here. And so this is one source of where you might find kind of well-connected nodes to connect to. But if we come back, let's go to peers, and let's now actually jump into the meat of things. I am quite fond of 1ml.com. So I'll link this in the description down below. And my prior videos, if you've watched those, I've done a walkthrough of this as well. But you basically have this page where you have all sorts of statistics on the Lightning Network in aggregate as well as by node. And so, you might just scroll down and look at top capacity nodes and most connected nodes. Async is up here, wallet of Satoshi, 1ML, and so on and so forth. And you can kind of click into these and see, of course, the public key, but also the rankings. So the lower the ranking, the better. Capacity ranked number 2, channel number ranked number 1, so on and so forth. So very cool stuff there. And indeed, why don't we get started with async? This is one of the massive nodes on the network. So we can go ahead and copy the public key here, and we'll come back over to Thunderhub and we will add a peer. And we will paste in the URL there, and let's hit add. Great, so we've added a peer. We can always click this arrow and get some additional statistics related to data transfer between this. We can see the node capacity, which is useful, number of channels, etc. All right, so let's come over to channels now. And so this little gear icon in the top right, I can click to open a new channel. Open new channel. And so they've offered up a couple kind of default channels that you may want to connect with. So that could be fine. But let's go the manual route just to show what that looks like. So I'll hit open, and you will see a couple of different parameters that we need to input. Now, if this was a new peer, you could always choose that and paste that in. So it's not like we necessarily needed to do the async peer connection, although that is a good starting point. Earlier, you can always say yes to is new peer, but in this case, we'll say no, and we'll just choose from the existing peers that we've added. So there is async. And now we have to specify the channel size. This is obviously important, and it really depends on, as we were discussing earlier, what you want to achieve with this. If you're primarily wanting to use this to, pay outwards, this channel doesn't have to be massive. Keep in mind that there are on-chain fees that you will need to pay in order to open and close channels. And so that is always a relevant cost. But, at this point, given where the mempool is, it's not nothing too crazy there. But again, if you want to if you're like, nope, I'm going to make this a routing node, then you'll want to be pretty thoughtful and choose a number here that is reasonably high, maybe 1 million sats plus. In my case, I'm just gonna, let's do something like 750,000. And then for the fees, you can either set it to auto, and it'll give you, do fastest, half hour, hour, or to specify the sats per virtual byte manually in a kind of custom form. So I'm willing to pay just so that it settles a little bit faster. It's just increased. You also have some advanced features here. You can create this in you can basically create a private channel, meaning that you would not be able to route payments back through you. So obviously you would want to keep this public, particularly if you're doing routing. Great, so we've got our channel size, we've got who we're opening it with. Let's go ahead and open this channel. All right, it says channel opened, and of course we've got it as set to pending. All right, so as this works to be confirmed, let's talk about inbound liquidity, because as you'll see, I have this local balance of 747,000 sats, but I have a remote balance of 0, right? And so what this means is I cannot receive payments. I can send payments, so I have outbound liquidity, but I do not have any inbound liquidity. And so unless your sole use case is to send payments out, this is a problem, right? You can't route payments if there's no inbound liquidity. And if you're a merchant trying to accept Bitcoin as payment, it's even more important to have that inbound liquidity for folks to pay you. So there are a whole host of ways to get inbound liquidity. The best kind of exhaustive list, I'm sure even this is not exhaustive, but the best list I have found is the following on plebnet.wiki. I will link this in the description down below. Getting inbound liquidity, and it has a whole host of different ways to do it. There are services where you can basically, pay someone to open a channel with you. There are things like the Lightning Conductor, where you may be able to, they basically say that, if you open a channel with them, they'll open a channel back. There are peer-to-peer agreements. So there's Telegram groups where you can get together with folks and collaboratively open channels with each other so that you can kind of manage liquidity that way. There's Lightning Pool, which I was mentioning earlier. That's something accessible in Lightning Terminal. And the list goes on and on. And so for purposes of this video, why don't we check out something like LN Big? This is one of the bigger kind of services for this. You can come over to open a channel. And as you can see, you've got this sliding bar for purchasing inbound liquidity. And I mean, this goes all the way up to a whole Bitcoin. So we're not going to do that. Maybe let's do something close to, 500,000 or so. It's a little tough to be precise, I guess, with this, but that is okay. It gives us the price of the service in dollars and sats. So we'll pay 4,400 sats for the service that LN Big will be performing, which is opening a channel with us to get us inbound liquidity. It has a opening and closing fee, a little bit aggressive in sats per virtual byte, but that is okay. And then it has some terms. This is basically them being, conservative. There can be things like channel closings if you're, if nodes go offline. There can be bad things that happen with that if channels are closed sort of disruptively. But that is less of a problem, and particularly so with something big like LN Big. But just be advised that if your node is offline for an extended period of time, your channel partners may choose to close things out and settle the balances accordingly. So let's go ahead and hit I agree. And so now what it's going to give us is a prepayment invoice. So this is a Lightning invoice that we will pay, but the funds will only be taken after they have successfully opened the channel. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this invoice and pop back over to Thunderhub. I'll hit connect again just to get back in. And now that 3 confirmations have passed, you'll see that I now have an actual proper balance now that it's loaded in Lightning. So I've got that. It's now gone from pending to total now that I have 3 on-chain confirmations for the channel opening. And so now I will choose to send some sats to the invoice. And it's decoding the invoice. There will be a little description attached to it. All right, so we've got the invoice pasted in. You can see the description embedded is a prepayment for a channel opening, and I'll go ahead and hit pay. As we can see, the prepayment has been paid, so that is good. All right, so we've put in our public key there, and it looks great. We want this to be a public channel. Let's go ahead and hit all right. Oh, here we go. We want this guy. All right, we've added the peer. All right, so in the editing, I'm gonna try and put as much of the LN Big flow that you can see. For some reason, I was having issues with connectivity earlier. So basically, you choose the size of the channel you want them to open with you. You pay that fee, you pay that invoice for the service, and then you put in your node information, your public key, and then they will likely present to you one of their nodes to connect as a peer, and then that should be that. But for some reason, I was having issues with connectivity. I actually noticed my node was running a bit hot. The fan had somehow turned off, the little fan that I have attached to it. So anyway, all that, long story said, I still wanted to show that workflow. Hopefully that was just a sort of me thing earlier. But what I did in the meantime is I used a different tool called Lightning Conductor from our handy list here. And so what's really nice is, when you come to Lightning Conductor, you'll see this homepage, and then you can go to return channels, and you can open a channel with them, and they will then turn around and open one back with you. Very, very cool stuff, and that worked well. And so now, as you can see, I've got some different channels. I've got my my channel that I opened with them, and I have also sent a payment to myself in another Lightning wallet, just to illustrate this next point that we're going to discuss. And then, as you can see, they have opened up a channel with me. So I've got the inbound liquidity here. I've got the outbound local balance there. So now what we want to show and demonstrate is their rebalancing tool, which is very nifty. So I'll go to rebalance, and then this is at the peer level, so it's not at the channel level. And so you'll see for me there are only two selections since I have two peers. I just happen to have two channels with the one. And so in the outgoing case, you want to have a peer that has the majority of the capacity on the local side. And so indeed that is async for me. And then for the incoming, you want to choose essentially the opposite. So I sent that payment that you saw reflected by that little bit of green in the earlier view, just to ensure that I had more remote balance at the peer level with Lightning Conductor, right? And so if I had 50-50, it would have thrown an issue. So just keep that in mind. Outgoing selection, you should have more in the local balance, and then the incoming, you should have more in the remote balance than you have in the local. Now what we want to do, so we can configure these. I'll speak to fees in just a moment. Let's leave these as default for now. And then in terms of fixed versus target, fixed is basically how much do you want to rebalance. Target is how much inbound liquidity you want to target once the rebalancing is done. So we'll go ahead and leave fixed for now. Let's think of, we could probably just do something like 100,000 sats. You can choose to avoid nodes if you'd like. Let's go ahead and hit rebalance. Okay, so you can see this error, rebalance total fee too high. So I am suspecting that this 10 max fee is probably not high enough. So keep in mind that this is a very restrictive setup, meaning if I was just sending a payment from A to B, that has a lot more optionality to use the sort of network topography to get that payment from A to B. Because I'm specifying both the outgoing peer and the incoming peer, that limits the set of routes significantly, and therefore maybe the only viable route had a total fee amount that is in excess of what I have as the max fee here. So why don't I, really crank that up, to something like this, again, just for purposes of showing this. All right, as you can see, we got it to go through. This can be a little bit finicky. There's no kind of silver bullet, but basically we were able to get 50,000 sats of inbound liquidity over on the async side, and correspondingly we got a little bit over on the outbound side, or that same amount over on the outbound side for our Lightning Conductor peer. We paid a total of 27 sats. Not too bad. And we can now see those respective updates. Now, if I were, this is not wildly balanced, as you can still see. There's still the vast majority of the, it's still heavily weighted to the local side. And so if you were kind of actually doing this, probably the best way to do it would be to get a peer that is sort of strictly inbound to you, and then have a peer that is strictly outbound to you, and do the rebalance using those. In the case of Lightning Conductor, because they opened one with me and I opened one with them, it sort of worked out a little bit funny. But the rebalancing is a super useful tool. It just can be a little bit finicky. You may have to play around a little bit with the settings, especially around fees, in order to accomplish that. Speaking of fees, if you're trying to run a routing node, you may be wondering, well, how can I do that? And so what we want to do is come to the setting or the gear wrench here, and where it says change channel details, you can set different fee amounts. And so there's a couple different fees to be aware of. So the base fee is just like how much will be charged for each payment that you forward. So specifically, it's the hash time lock contract, given how the Lightning Network works. Basically, every payment you're forwarding, how much do you want to collect? And so, you could put a SAT in. I think this would typically be pretty small. The fee rate, right? So this base fee is getting paid no matter what. It's getting paid every single time you forward a payment. The rate, which is in kind of parts per million, is a proportional fee. And so this is charged based on the value of the payment that you are forwarding. And so you're typically going to see this probably somewhere in the low hundreds, so maybe you have like 100 here. CLTV delta is kind of like a timeout setting. It's basically the number of blocks beyond which the payment will terminate. Or said another way, like you'll commonly see something like 40 here. And so this is to say that whatever payment you forwarded, whatever hash time lock contract you forwarded, has to be claimed within 40 blocks before it has to be settled. And so this is kind of like a timeout setting, if you will. And then you can also specify optionally, if you choose, a max and a min hash time lock amount. So, maybe it's like a SAT on the lower end and, something obviously much larger on the higher end. But that should align with your channel sizes as well. And then you can apply those updates to your channels. And then as your node routes payments, you will be able to see some of that information in the forwards section. So you'll see how many payments are being forwarded. And based on that, you can calculate how much you are earning. The higher you set your fees, the lower activity you're going to get, the fewer forwards you're going to get because the network is obviously competitive and it's finding the path of least resistance and the most optimal path in terms of fees to route payments. And you now have a lot of even big node operators who are just running zero fee routing, which is wild. So there you have it. That's how you would configure your fees. And then let's say for whatever reason, okay, maybe you want to close some channels out. You can do that by clicking on one of your channels here and scrolling down to close the channel if you wish. And so what that would basically do is it would create another on-chain transaction that would settle the respective amounts to either party. And then again, reminder, you can also use the swap tool if you want to just take some of your sats off of Lightning onto on-chain without closing a channel. So that can be useful, right? Maybe you want to keep the channel open, but you want to take some of the liquidity out of Lightning back onto onto the actual chain. You will pay obviously a fee to do that, and you have a minimum and maximum amount that you can do that for. But this is a really handy tool in order to do that without closing channels. So there you have it, my friends. I think we'll leave this here for now. There's definitely some other bells and whistles that we may explore in future videos. But just to recap, we looked at how to create, how to establish connections with peers, how to create channels with those peers, how to acquire inbound capacity using one of the methods we discussed, how to rebalance those channels to ensure that you've got a better balance in case in which you want to use this as a routing node. We talked about how to set your fees, how to look at the number of forwards that your node is routing, and that can obviously vary over time. And then how to close channels and or move liquidity off of Lightning onto main chain using the swap functionality. So let's go ahead and with that, close today's video out. All right, my friends, there you have it. So we went through Thunderhub today. Again, my biggest kind of recommendation in all of this is if you're just starting out, if you're kind of leveling up your Lightning game, as it were, take your time, take baby steps, be patient. Lightning, despite its meteoric growth, is still in its relative infancy. And so while the software and tools available to us as node operators have come a long way since even a year or two ago, it's still going to take some time and careful thought to do things right. So take your time, but I'm curious to hear what you think. Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments down below. Is there a different tool you use that you really like? Let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. But for now, we're going to go ahead and conclude this video. I hope you found this valuable and interesting. If you did, you already know what to do. Smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything in the future. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave this here. As a reminder, my friends, every sat counts. And until next time, I'll see you then.